Yeah, hello everybody. The meeting took a little bit longer, so we start with a little delay for today. Yeah, well, what have we done last time? This was more or less a little revision of your introduction to macroeconomics, but then we discussed the ISLM model on a, so to speak, more theoretical basis, since we generally derived especially the dependence on monetary policy issues of aggregated income on a change of real money in a, so to speak, theoretical way, and not only graphical, and not only with using linear functions, but we have seen that it is then enough when we just only define qualitatively the direction of the derivatives of all dependencies within our model. And here also this was then element, the marginal consumption between 1 and 0 and 1, and that from these general assumptions in the end we could also derive the graphical result that an increase of money will then have a positive impact on income. And what we now want to talk about is, well, we have the direction, but of course, in practice, we also have to know, well, how large is this effect? And for this, we will have a look on different situations. Then we, of course, also discussed in more detail how these monetary policy instruments feed through this model. And what we want to discuss now is a problem which we more or less had for the last 10 years until again prices have started to risen with high inflation rates, and right now also with the situation that we have again quite high interest rates. But we had a situation between within 2009 to 2021, we had almost a decade, or we had a decade of roughly zero nominal interest rates. Well, and when we derived the dependencies on money demand with respect to interest rates, there we then said, well, the negative dependence we can motivate more or less by the opportunity cost argument, because if we interpret money as an investment, then it is just an investment with zero interest rate. And the higher the comparable investment, the interest rate or the yield of the comparable investment is, the less money I will hold. Well, but now if we have a definite situation where more or less we have zero interest rates in the economy, then households became more or less indifferent between holding money and holding other investments, and the first comparison is with holding bonds. And yeah, and this then mean, because we want to discuss now the effect, what is the effect on the real economy when I'm doing monetary policy, that then I have to admit, in such a situation where I am around 0% interest rates, that then money demand becomes highly elastic. And that then, if I still start to increase the money supply side, so roughly spoken, starting to print money, then also qualitatively I derived a positive effect that in this case I will have in absolute values almost no effect, or only in a very little size. And well, how can we motivate this? When we derived the LM curve, then we started from a diagram of interest rates, and on the horizontal axis money demand, and of course also money supply, so the quantity of real money. So the red vertical line, this is the set amount of money by the central bank. So this is supply of money. But now, if we are in this situation of very low interest rates, then we are here, as we argued, in a situation with highly elastic money demand. So money demand is then more or less a horizontal line. And if we then start to derive the LM curve like we did it in the graphical case, then this elastic demand on money translates for the LM curve in the highly elastic range for the LM curve, also for very low interest rates. And that in opposite, if we go with the income to the right, that then we will be in a highly inelastic range of the LM curve. So in general, when we look at a large range of income or interest rate at the LM curve, then we will not find, as we did it in our introductory course, just a line, but we will get a function which is banded and has this very highly elastic range and this highly inelastic range. Well, and then we also add the IS curve. IS curve still the falling dependency from the commodity market of interest rates and income. And now what happens in this case when we are here at very low interest rates? Then of course, qualitatively still the LM curve moves to the right. And this we see here. So if we increase of money supply, then still our LM curve moves to the right. But we are in a case where we just at very low interest rates in the beginning. Oh, I0, sorry. And this means that within this range, an increase of money from M0 to M1, well, still shifts the LM curve to the right, but the effect, since we are already in the part of very low interest rates, so to speak, there is not much potential to even lower the interest rates. So still I1 is smaller than I0, but only a little bit. And this then of course means that also the shift of the new equilibrium of equilibrium income will shift only a little bit. And this means in general, so since we are already in the elastic part of the LM curve, an increase of money supply will have only a very small positive effect on income. And the reason is, yeah, well, that we are, so to speak, still sitting on our money. Because still we have no, not a real incentive to start to invest. And thus, as when we have a look at the increase of money, and this we can, yeah, see at the by the increase of the balance sheet of the large central banks, the ECB and the Fed, during these times, that almost, yeah, I think the Fed increased their balance sheet by a factor of 5 to 6, and the ECB even increased their balance sheet by a factor of 10. And still, we had not, during these times, a real push on output via the monetary policy instruments. Well, and this, of course, also then depends on the situation where are our prices going. And yeah, let's think about that. we think that since we have printed money, so to speak, in this very large manner during these times, then we could have an idea that, well, in some time in the future, prices have to start. So now we are somehow in this situation in 2021 when prices really started to increase. And this then would mean that we have an expectation of inflation. And let's assume, or let's, well, and now we are in this situation where nominal interest rates are zero and that we would have an expectation of inflation rates of 10%. Well, this then translates in real interest rates of I minus the expected inflation rate. So then also the real interest rate will be minus, or then the real interest rate will be highly negative by minus 10%. And this then would mean that, so to speak, today money is for us much more valuable than tomorrow money. Because you just think about the situation, well, holding my money just in my bed, what happens? Well, if I'm expecting 10% of inflation, then this would mean with my 1,000 euros tomorrow, I could also buy real goods in an amount of less than 10% less than today. So if we would have these expectation, then this liquidity trap would not be that serious problem, because then I would start to consume today, because I'm just comparing these two situations. And this then would mean that in this case also the central bank would have an incentive to even push expected inflation in a minute. And this was more or less also the case, especially for the ECB. They somehow tried to push up expected inflation. Remember, I think I mentioned this also in your macro course, that during this time they started to change their inflation target. So until 2019, the inflation target of the ECB was around 2%, but always less. And then they started to change these inflation target to still to 2%, but symmetrically around 2%. So we will in future also accept higher inflation rates than 2%. Only in the medium term, we want to have these 2%. And this was also just a signal. Well, in the future time, we want that prices will increase. A question? Well, they are driven by the target inflation. Well, if the central banks, as I just mentioned it, if the central bank says our target is 2%, then of course, or 2%, or it is 2%, but we will go to 2% only from below. Then of course this also drives our expectations. What will be in my personal view, inflation in the future? Because then, as an economic agent, I always assume, well, in this case, when I see inflation rates of 3 or 4%, then I assume that the central bank will intervene. So expected inflation is just the average inflation rate which all agents in the economy expect for the future. But of course, these expected inflation rates are driven by the targets of the central bank. So they are not identically, but as I mentioned, since then in 2019 the target was changed, not quantitatively, still 2%, but now I said symmetrically around 2%. Then, of course, in general, the expected inflation will also increase, because then I do not have the assumption anymore that if I'm higher than 2%, that directly the central bank will intervene. But then we go back in the times 2015, 16, 17. When we look at the inflation rates in these times, we were always around 1%, sometimes even only 0.5%, and only very seldom we reached the 2% target of the central bank. So even in the times when the economy didn't perform that well, then there was also sometimes the expectation that maybe even prices will fall. And let's, for this case, also assume now the opposite, namely a deflation, so that inflation will decrease. So now we assume a deflation, and such a situation we have in Japan for roughly the last 25 years. I don't know, somebody of you has maybe Japan as a country for the term paper. You have it? Okay, and then you maybe have seen this, that there in Japan the prices are, or the inflation rates are really low, and even they are negative during the last 25 years. And additionally, we have in Japan the situation of very low interest rates or even zero interest rates in the last year. And why is this situation quite dangerous? Again, let's calculate real interest rates, nominal interest rates minus expected inflation. And now we assume that we have an expectation of falling prices in the future. So this would mean then 0 minus 5% in our example equals plus 5% of real interest rates. And this means, although we have a nominal interest rate which in general should push the economy, because the prices for credits are really low when we have zero nominal interest rates, this has nevertheless the potential to dampen the economy. because this then means that if we look at the IS curve, that this in real terms moves even to the left. And now we take here real interest rates. Or the IS curve and our LM curve. And if this moves to the left, that then even our income will also decrease. And yeah, Japan had or still has this problem that more or less the people think not to consume today means in this case that tomorrow I can consume more. So the argumentation is just in the opposite way here, that in this case then today's money will be less worth than tomorrow money. And this is especially a huge problem if you look at larger investments in the private sector and in the entrepreneur sector. Because then think of the situation, should I do the last large investments in new computers, in new machines? And then I think because of the development of prices, this investment will in 1 or 2 years be cheaper for me. And then in general, on average, investments in the economy will decrease, or many investments will not be done today, but only maybe tomorrow. And this, of course, then also dampens in general the demand for real goods. And then the economy in a situation with very low nominal interest rates plus an expectation of deflation is really a very serious problem for an economy, because then you have almost no possibility anymore to externally push your economy. And this is what the politicians in Japan try for now 2 decades, somehow to break the expectations of their people. Okay, that much for monetary policy, and I think maybe next week or in 2 weeks we will also speak about an explicit model of monetary policy and how the incentives of central banks are in a theoretical way to push inflation. But now, since our course is global economics, as I mentioned already, we will now add to our ISLM model the international part, because we are not alone. And this is called the Mundell-Fleming model. Mundell was also a Nobel Prize winner. And This model is named after these two very famous economists. And what we have now again is, of course, we have the commodity market, we have the money market, and now we just look at exports and imports. So we have the exchange markets with other countries. And if you remember again your introductory courses, there we have the national account system where we wrote down everything what happens within the economy. And then we had the balance of payment. And this was all the interactions of the country with abroad, with other countries. So where we mainly write down the exports and imports of goods and services, and on the other side, the capital movement in of our country. Well, two main assumptions we still make, and this is still we assume that commodity prices are fixed. So still we will not find any P in our model. So in behind we have set this more or less just equal 1 because we assume still it does not change. And what we also assume in our model here is, yeah, so to speak, we are not a very large country or economic region within the world, so we cannot change, so to speak, the global level of interest rates. We have our own interest rate, but we have no direct influence on the global interest rate. Well, and in practice, we still more or less can say that everybody has to look at the interest rates of the United States. So it has really, I show you maybe today also the a time series where you can really see that still interest rates in the world with some time lag follows more or less the interest rates set by the Fed in the United States. So it is not a bad assumption because we see this also in practice. Okay. And now we have to model this part here. The external markets. And this is just our net exports. So this is our trade balance, which we now have to add. Remember also when we introduced gross domestic product, there we had consumption, investment, plus government expenditure, plus the trade balance, exports minus imports. Oops, there's a U missing. So, and now we need the dependencies. Still, this is just the dependencies from our ISLM model. And additionally, of course, the trade balance will somehow depend on the exchange rate. The trade balance, of course, will also depend on our income. Well, how can we motivate the minus dependence on our own income? Well, this would mean the richer I am, the more I'm starting to buy at the international markets. But if I'm buying more at the international markets, then my imports will increase. And if my imports are increasing, then of course my trade balance, exports minus imports, will decrease. Okay? So this means if the country is richer, so income increases, then the country will buy more at the international markets, and thus imports will increase, and then exports minus imports, imports increase equals NX will decrease. Well, and the argumentation for the plus sign, the dependence of income of the trade partner is of course the same, because then we say our trade partner is richer, and if our trade partner is richer, then our trade partner will buy more in our countries. So our exports are the imports of our trade partners. And then, of course, this means the richer our trade partners are, the higher will be our exports, and thus we assume that we are positively dependent on the income of our international trade partners. So in this case, we have the opposite argumentation. Richer trade partners will buy more in our countries, and thus our or home exports will increase, and thus NX will also increase, since they are defined as exports minus imports. So trade balance will also increase. So, and now we come to the dependence, and this is, a bit more complicated. The dependence of our trade balance on the exchange rate. Well, and there, plus minus, we have at first also define what do we mean by exchange rate. Well, exchange rate is just the exchange between my currency versus the currency from abroad. So think how much euros I have to pay for $1. And this I can define that I count euros in units of US dollar, or I can define it the other way around, US dollar in units of euro. And what we use here is the so-called indirect quotation, and this is mainly used when you look at exchange rate, that you take always the view from the country you are in. So that I then show you that I show you the price of my currency in terms of the foreign currency. So right now, what do we have here? Let's have a look at rate euro dollar. Well, and let's see here. This is a European page. So from the perspective of the Eurozone, and today's or yesterday's exchange rate was $1 equals €1 equals 1.05 US dollar. And now let's have a look at Bloomberg. Let's see. No, they have it also here because I have an IP address from the Eurozone. Let's see if I can find this exchange rate euro dollar. Let's see, Wall Street Journal. This is also because I am having an Europe IP address. Sorry, I wanted to show you euro to US dollar. Let's see, maybe this one. No. So I'm sorry, I cannot find it right now, but you have to be careful that because sometimes then if you are at a US web page, then they take the view from the US perspective, and then you will find roughly 0.96 at the exchange rate, because then you use the indirect quotation just from the view of the United States. Well, but this then means that if the exchange rate €1 equals 1.05 US dollar, that if the number increases maybe to 1.10, that this would then mean that the euro is more valuable with respect to the US dollar. So an increase of the number then means that our currency is appreciating. Well, and in general, we will assume a negative dependence on the exchange rate. Well, qualitatively, this seems more or less quite clear, because what does it mean if my currency is depreciating? Then my goods I want to sell internationally will become cheaper. And then I can assume, okay, in this case, the my trade partners will buy more goods from me. So that then I can assume that exports can increase. Okay? Hmm? Yeah. Yeah, yeah. This is the idea, and at a first step, it seems quite clear. If I'm depreciating, then my goods will be cheaper, and then the other ones will yeah will buy more goods. So exports will increase, and therefore also my trade balance will increase. But you have to be careful. And this hopefully you have done in your business administration or also in your micro course. If you think of revenue, then this is just price times quantity. Well, and then, of course, I assume that my quantity is depending on the price. And the assumption is the higher the price, the less is the quantity, and the other way around. So if I now decrease the price, here the international price, via a depreciation of the exchange rate, then of course this quantity will go up. But the price has going down. This has going up. But the product, you don't know what, in which direction will move the product in general. If the one part is going down and the other part is going up. And this then depends on the elasticity. So if prices go down, it is not clear in which direction the product P times X will move. So if the impact of a lowering price, let's assume we are reducing the price by 1%. If then the quantity is increasing by more than 1%, then I have an increase of revenue. But if still I have the positive impact on quantity, but my quantity is only rising by 0.5%, then the product price times the new quantity will be even lower than before. And of course, these effect we have also at the international markets, where the price of my exports and imports is just the exchange rate. And for this, we have to make the assumption that the so-called Marshall-Lerner conditions, and what this means, we will see in a minute, holds, so that this is just an assumption. So we cannot in general argue this is a natural or the usual assumption that we have these negative dependence. On this we have another 15 minutes. I think we can make it. This we move later on. Oh, this is 2. I think here I have the Marshall-Lerner condition. Yeah. So at first we will deal with the Marshall-Lerner condition. So here we then say, well, we fix our trade balance, so to speak, with respect to the exports, so that we do not have to write in front of both variables, exports and imports, a price, because just the the relative price between exports and imports is just our exchange rate. And since we have used the indirect quotation, remember that then the price for the imports is just 1 over E. And now let's think of this. We have NX depending on the exchange rate is the quantity of exports depending on the exchange rate minus 1 over E and the import depending on exchange rate. So in this variable trade balance, we have 3 times the dependence on the exchange rate. And now we want to calculate the total dependence. And for this, in order to get the general dependence of n of x of A on exchange rate E, we have to take the derivative of nx with respect to E. So then let's do it. Del nx of E with respect to E. And for this, hopefully you can help me. So here we just only have, there is this positive dependence. Well, or if my currency appreciates, so if E is increasing, then my products will become more expensive, and then the quantity will fall. So here we have just dx with respect to E. And for this derivative, we just know, okay, this has to be negative because an increase of E lowers our quantity X. But now we have to take the derivative of this product here. What is the rule? If you have f of x is u of x times v of x, what is then f prime? This is the so-called product rule. To ux? No, we will only take the derivative in general with respect to x only. And if you have a product, then you have at first to take the derivative of the first part. So this will be then u prime of x and just multiplying with v of x plus, and now doing it the other way around, keeping just the function u of x times the first derivative of v of x. Okay? Yeah, now, so to speak, we can interpret this as u of e and this as v of e. So what we then need is, if u of e is 1 over e, the first part, what is then u prime? So the derivative of 1 over e with respect to e. This we can also write as e to the minus 1. Yes, definitely right. So 1 over e squared, or this is minus 1 times e to minus 2. Huh? So lowering the exponent by 1 means from minus 1 to minus 2, and writing the exponent just in front of your function. Okay, and now we just take this rule and we take this result together. So first, keep in mind we have here the minus sign in front. This is not this minus sign. Then since I have afterwards this sum here, I open just brackets so that I do not mix up all the minus signs now are coming. So, and then first the derivative we have calculated here. So minus 1 over e squared times the other function itself, not changing anything. So times imports. And now this plus sign here, plus the function ue, which is just 1 over e. So 1 over e times, and now the general derivative, the general derivative of imports with respect to the exchange rate. Okay, and now let's multiply these minus bracket here so that we can get rid of these double minus sign. So this will be then dx with respect to dE minus minus is plus, and already I'm writing this as or let's do it like this, e squared plus m, and now minus times plus is minus, so minus 1 over e dm with respect to e. And now we multiply this part here with exports over the exchange rate. Why we are doing this? This part here, let's do this in red. This is the derivative. But this, in general, we can also interpret as the change of exports over the change of the exchange rate E. So maybe this you have seen in other lectures, delta X over delta E. Well, and if we multiply this with X, oops, there's something wrong. What did I wrong? Oh, sorry. I multiply. This is always the trick which we want to do which we are quite often do in mathematics. We just multiply with the 1 since I do not want to change anything. So E over X, and this is just 1. And now I'm taking only this part here. This I need. If I'm moving just this downward, and now of course then I have here E over X, and this then I can write as delta X over x. And now E over the change of E is the same as 1 over the change of E over the exchange rate itself. So I can write this also as delta E over E. Well, but this is now the relative change of the quantity of exports. This is the relative change of our exchange rate. So then this is nothing else than the elasticity of exports with respect to the exchange rate. I hope that you have already talked about demand elasticities. So this is what I was arguing here. So this is the export elasticity with respect to the exchange rate. So, and we have made also an assumption that we are coming just from a situation of a balanced trade perspective of our country. So if this holds true, if oops, nx equals 0, then taking this definition, this means that exports equal 1 over E times imports. And this I can then feed in. Where do I find it? Now I have at first to calculate this. So I obtain then delta x over delta E times from this here E over x times, since I'm multiplying just with this one, so x over E is left, and then I get plus, and how can I do it in a simple way? In this case here, I just take out 1 over E E over M. No, at first let's just multiply this also with this one. So then 1 over e squared times the imports times e over x times x over e. This is just the 1 minus 1 over e times, and now I write also with the large delta, that we in a minute we can also interpret this as an elasticity over delta E, and now times E over X times X over E. And now this let's do this in another color, in green. This exports, since we are coming from a balanced trade, we can write as 1 over E times imports. So this is 1 over E times imports, and also this one here is 1 over E times imports. And then we obtain this. This is quite often then written as eta x. This is just the sign for the elasticity. So we obtain eta x times exports over the exchange rate plus, and now you have here these 1 over E. 1 over 1 over E means that I have then here E squared. Then I have here an E squared, and this cancels just with this E squared here. And I have also divided by imports. So these imports also canceling with these imports here. So this E and this E are canceling with this E squared. So I'm only left with exports over the exchange rate. And in this case here, I have 1 over E, and this E together again is E squared. But this E squared then here cancels with 1E here. So I'm only left with 1 E now in the denominator. So I obtain E. Then I have here over delta E. I have here my delta IM divided by the imports and times exports over E. Well, but this here is again relative change of imports divided by relative change of the exchange rate. So this is also the elasticity of imports. And in front of every part, I have exports over the exchange rate. So overall, I can take out this because you find it in every part. I obtain x over E is the elasticity of exports minus the elasticity of imports plus 1. And now we see, as you maybe have seen this in your micro course, if the elasticity for demand for some goods is in absolute values larger than 1, then you need lowering the price will increase my revenue, because the effect on quantity will overvalue the dampening for the revenue because of the lowered price. And here we see that in the international case we have the same result. Exports are negatively dependent on the exchange rate. So these are both, of course, because the higher my exchange rate, the more expensive are my exports. This is, of course, positively dependent, because the higher my exchange rate, then I'm, so to speak, richer. I can buy then the international products for a cheaper price. And for this, we quite often then write this one as x over E times the absolute value, since we know this is a negative number, putting a minus sign in front, minus the elasticity of imports plus 1. And then we know if, where do I have some space left? Let's go here. Then if the sum, or the absolute sum, of export and import elasticity is larger than 1, then the dependence of the trade balance will be negative. But of course, this bracket here, in order to obtain these results, has to be larger than 0. Well, and then we can say that in the real world, quite often this assumption is met in the medium or in the long run. And this I wrote down also here. Oops. Here we have in the short run quite often the so-called J-curve effect, and this is called therefore that if we take nx depending on the exchange rate, that then you have so-called such an dependence over time that at first you have the opposite direction, that even if you decrease your exchange rate, that in the short run even you find that your trade balance will then also fall. But in the medium and in the long run, we will quite often in practical cases see this dependence here. And this is called the Marshall-Lerner condition. And no, 10 minutes too long. This result we will use next week. Then what happens then in this model, in this international model, if we are doing now fiscal and monetary policy? Okay, thank you very much for today. Oops, there it is.